Victor, Vico, DeLuna Empire, and Luis, Crackshot. Morales tried to rewrite its rules in blood. And Elijah, Ghost. Ramos risked everything to tear it all down. What began as a gang war turned into a battle for California's soul. In the early 2000s, the streets of East Los Angeles were no stranger to gangs. But among the many, one group would rise above the rest in both fear and influence. They called themselves the Iron Vultures. Unlike most street crews that flashed colors or posed for cameras, the Vultures were quiet, deliberate, and dangerously effective. The man behind their creation was Vico, DeLuna, a former inmate with a reputation built on silence and strategy. Vico had spent 12 years in prison for armed robbery and assault. In that time, he observed how other gangs crumbled due to ego, disloyalty, and chaos. He decided to build something different, something built to last. Vico's first move wasn't violence, but organization. He recruited not just brawlers but minds, accountants, former military operatives, and men who knew the streets like the back of their hand. He offered loyalty in exchange for silence. No social media, no tattoos unless earned, no random acts of violence. Every hit, every deal. Every move had to be approved by Vico himself or one of his chosen captains. The structure resembled a corporation more than a gang. It was a system that baffled law enforcement and terrified rivals. At first, the Iron Vultures kept a low profile. They infiltrated neighborhoods under the guise of community work. They donated to local churches and helped families with rent money. All the while, they were setting up drug routes, gun drops, and laundering operations through small businesses. Their influence spread like oil, slow, slick, and impossible to clean once it soaked in. By 2007, they had firm control over key neighborhoods in East LA, Compton, and parts of San Diego, and nobody could trace a single major crime back to Vico. The name, Iron Vultures, came from a brutal message delivered early in their rise. When a rival gang known as the Cobras tried to kidnap a Vulture lieutenant, Vico ordered a retaliation. The Cobras were found chained to an abandoned rail yard, their faces covered in vulture feathers painted with iron filings. The message was clear: touch one vulture, and the whole flock descends. The brutality behind the name spread faster than the story itself, giving birth to urban legends that made even seasoned gangsters pause before crossing them. Vico never left paper trails. He didn't carry a phone, didn't live in a permanent residence, and never spoke directly to dealers. He communicated through a tight group of 6 lieutenants, each with their own crew. They were known only by nicknames: Crackshot, Ghost, Vice, Ice Hand, Reaper, and Hollow. Each had a role to play and a zone to control. They weren't friends. They didn't gather or celebrate. They were trained to act without emotion, to follow orders as if the consequences of failure were worse than death. And in the Vulture world, they often were. As the years passed, rumors began to swirl about what the Vultures were capable of. Some said they were tied to disappearances along the California-Mexico border. Others believed they had connections inside law enforcement. One anonymous source even claimed Vico had bribed a city council member to block redevelopment in neighborhoods the Vultures planned to take over, but no one could prove anything. Arrests were rare, and when they happened, the suspects vanished before trial or refused to speak. By 2010, the Iron Vultures were not just feared. They were respected in a twisted sense. They had brought order to chaos, even if that order came from intimidation and bloodshed. Drug violence in their territories decreased, not because drugs stopped flowing, but because no one dared cause trouble without permission. Residents lived under an unspoken agreement: don't talk, don't ask, don't interfere. And in return, the Vultures ensured some form of twisted peace. But behind that calm, something darker was building. A younger generation inside the gang was beginning to question the rules. They didn't fear Vico the way the original members did. They wanted expansion, recognition, and blood. Among them was Luis, Crackshot, Morales, a sharpshooter and strategist with a hunger for power. Crackshot believed Vico was holding the gang back. He began to push limits, testing boundaries with bolder moves and reckless ambition. The Iron Vultures were about to face a storm from within, one that would shatter their silent empire and turn California's streets into a battleground soaked in secrets, betrayal, and war. The tension that had been quietly building beneath California's surface finally erupted when Luis, Crackshot, Morales made his move. Crackshot had been rising fast within the Iron Vultures, gaining favor with younger members and staking his name on daring heists and risky deals. He saw himself not just as Vico DeLuna's successor, but as someone who could take the Vultures into a new era. Bolder and more feared than ever. His sights were set on the Baleen, a stretch of territory running from San Jose through Oakland, rich with meth production and already controlled by a rival gang known as the Red Rooks. The Red Rooks were nothing like the Vultures. They were loud, messy, and always in the news for shootings and turf battles. Their leader, Salvador Cruz, had built his empire on fear and unpredictability. Known for wearing red suits and walking with a silver cane, Sal was flashy and theatrical, but no less dangerous. He ruled the Bayline with paranoia, watching everyone and trusting no one, not even his closest lieutenants. The Vultures had always avoided open conflict with the Rooks. But Crackshot didn't care about old rules. He believed the only way to gain dominance was by breaking them. Without Vico's knowledge, Crackshot arranged for a series of business discussions in Bayline under fake identities. These meetings weren't about diplomacy. They were about spying, mapping the Rooks' routes, stash houses, and weak spots. Within weeks, he had a complete blueprint of the Bayline operation. Instead of bringing it to Vico, he acted on his own. Crackshot sent 3 of his most loyal men to hit a Red Rook convoy transporting meth. The attack was brutal. 2 Rooks were killed, and over $500,000 worth of product vanished. The message was clear: the Vultures were coming. Saul Cruz didn't take the hit lightly. Though he couldn't confirm who was responsible, whispers pointed toward a rising Vulture cell from Los Angeles. Rather than wait for another attack, Sal retaliated. He ordered a drive-by on what he believed was a Vulture outpost in Stockton. The shooters missed their intended targets but killed a mother and her 2 sons in the crossfire. The tragedy made headlines, and the heat from law enforcement increased tenfold. Vico, who had been trying to keep the Vultures clean and out of unnecessary headlines, was furious. When word reached him that Crackshot had acted without approval, Vico summoned his inner circle. He considered executing Crackshot for insubordination. But the damage was done. The Red Rooks now viewed the Vultures as active enemies. Pulling back would make them look weak. For the first time in years, Vico found himself cornered. He chose a compromise. He'd allow a limited engagement to clean up the situation. But the chaos that followed was anything but limited. Crackshot, now emboldened by his ability to trigger war, launched a coordinated strike on 2 Rook stash houses in Hayward and East Oakland. In response, Sal Cruz orchestrated an ambush at a Vulture-owned nightclub in Modesto. The attack left 6 dead and injured 10 more. The Iron Vultures, known for staying silent and out of the media spotlight, were suddenly the face of a growing gang war. News outlets ran headlines about California's most dangerous mafia. Police departments across the state launched new gang task forces. And behind it all, Vico watched his empire unravel. The body count kept rising. What started as territorial greed now became a vendetta. Crackshot began targeting Sal's family, something even the cold-blooded Vico had always avoided. When Saul's younger brother was gunned down outside a pool hall in Fresno, the war crossed a line that couldn't be undone. In retaliation, a group of Red Rooks bombed a tattoo shop known to be frequented by Vulture members. The explosion killed 4 people, including an innocent teenager who had no ties to either gang. By this point, the war wasn't just on the streets. It was everywhere. Social media lit up with footage of shootings, crime blogs posted real-time updates, and communities lived in constant fear. Schools shut down early. Parents kept their kids indoors. Residents who had once appreciated the Vultures' sense of order now began to hate them. Crackshot didn't care. He believed all of this was necessary. Vico, however, saw the signs of collapse, the very principles he had built. The silence, the structure, the control were slipping away. The Bayline had become a war zone, and the Iron Vultures were no longer the shadowy rulers of California's underworld. They were in the spotlight, drenched in blood, and hunted from both sides, by enemies and the law alike. As the violence between the Iron Vultures and the Red Rooks escalated, law enforcement had no choice but to step in with force. The chaos wasn't just gang on gang anymore. Civilians were getting caught in the crossfire, entire neighborhoods were living in fear, and California's political leaders were demanding answers. That's when a multi-agency task force was quietly formed under the codename Operation Dustfall. Leading the charge was FBI Special Agent Maya Kessler, known for her strategic mind and relentless approach to gang takedowns. She had dismantled cartels in the past, but what she saw unfolding in California was unlike anything she'd faced before. The Iron Vultures were difficult to infiltrate. Unlike most gangs, they didn't rely on loose alliances or loud enforcers. Their internal system was tight, disciplined, and designed to protect the core leadership at all costs. Members used burner phones, never repeated locations, and kept their personal lives disconnected from operations. Arrests were nearly impossible to make stick, but Maya had one advantage. The vultures were bleeding, and cracks were starting to show. The key came in the form of a man named Tarek Bell. Tarek wasn't a shooter or a drug dealer. He was an accountant, brought in to clean the books for several vulture-owned businesses in San Diego and Riverside. On paper, he looked clean. No criminal record, no gang affiliations, just a man with a math degree and a weak spot for poker. That weakness would cost him everything. Tariq had racked up over $200,000 in gambling debt, and the people he owed weren't patient. They started threatening his family. Desperate and out of options, he turned himself in and offered to cooperate. Maya seized the opportunity. With a carefully crafted deal that promised full protection and relocation, she turned Tariq into an informant. What he provided in just the first few weeks was gold. Names, drop locations, cash flow maps, and most importantly, the operational hierarchy of the vultures. Maya kept the circle of trust small. Only a handful of agents knew about Tarek, and all surveillance was done off, book to avoid leaks. But despite the precautions, someone talked. Less than 72 hours after Tarek's first debriefing, he vanished. His body was discovered 3 days later under a freeway bridge near the LA River. His fingers had been cut off, and his mouth soon shut with black thread. No note, no message, just a silent warning that echoed loudly through law enforcement. Betrayal comes at a cost. The loss of Tarek hit Maya hard, not just personally but strategically. His information had only scratched the surface. Now, every step forward came with double the danger. She knew someone inside the system was either compromised or being watched. Operation Dustfall was temporarily frozen, but Maya wasn't done. She needed a new in. Someone younger, less connected to the old system, and with something to lose. That's when she found Elijah, Ghost, Ramos. Ghost was a quiet 21-year-old who worked logistics for the Iron Vultures. He wasn't a fighter, but he was responsible for moving shipments, tracking vehicles, and setting up safe houses. What set him apart was his clean record and his hidden family life. Unlike most vultures, Ghost had kept a low profile and maintained close ties with his younger sister, who was finishing high school and had no idea what her brother was involved in. Maya saw an opportunity. She approached Ghost carefully, making sure not to spook him. Through surveillance, she identified the one thing he couldn't afford to lose: his sister. When Maya finally confronted him, she didn't use threats. She offered protection, safety, and a clean slate for both of them. At first, Ghost resisted. But after a close call with a Red Rooks hit squad that nearly killed his sister, he gave in. He agreed to help. With Ghost on the inside, Maya finally began piecing together the core of the Vulture operation. She identified Vico's lieutenants, uncovered secret meeting spots, and learned about the money trails stretching from California to Arizona and Nevada. Ghost also confirmed what she feared most. Crackshot wasn't just acting alone anymore. He had built a splinter faction within the Vultures, loyal only to him, and they were planning to move against Vico. The Iron Vultures weren't just at war with outsiders. They were quietly splitting from within. And that fracture, Maya realized, could be the very thing that brought them down. The gang that once prided itself on silence and loyalty was starting to tear itself apart. And now, for the first time, law enforcement had a real shot at ending it all. But it would require perfect timing, absolute secrecy, and a level of risk that could destroy everyone involved. The moment Special Agent Maya Kessler had been waiting for finally arrived when Elijah, Ghost, Ramos handed over the most valuable piece of intelligence yet, a detailed plan of an upcoming meeting between the Iron Vultures' inner circle. According to Ghost, the gathering would be held at a warehouse in Fresno, an abandoned freight facility hidden behind a legitimate shipping company. It was to be the first face-to-face meeting between Vico DeLuna and his lieutenants in over a year. Tensions had reached a boiling point, and Vico was calling the meeting to reassert control, possibly to deal with Crackshot's insubordination once and for all. To Maya, this was the break she needed. After years of whispers, dead ends, and bodies that told no tales, she had a location, a time, and a list of attendees. She knew it had to be fast, surgical, and untraceable until it was done. A raid of this size required multi-agency coordination, local SWAT, federal agents, and state police units. The plan was approved in less than 48 hours. Operation Dustfall was reactivated, and Fresno became the target of the most significant gang crackdown California had seen in decades. The night before the raid, Ghost disappeared. Maya's team searched safe houses, checked traffic cameras, and even suspected a double cross. But Ghost wasn't running. He was taking a risk of his own. He knew Crackshot would not attend the meeting in Fresno. He had heard rumors of a separate gathering happening miles away in Bakersfield, a meeting between Crackshot and some of the younger lieutenants planning a quiet coup. Ghost had no proof, only instinct. If Maya raided Fresno and missed Crackshot, the war wouldn't end, it would evolve. So Ghost made the decision alone. He tracked Crackshot's team to an old farmhouse without telling Maya and left a burner phone with coordinates, hoping she would understand. At 3:47 a.m., as planned, the warehouse in Fresno was surrounded and breached. It was chaos. Dozens of Vulture members were caught completely off guard. Firearms, cash, and stacks of unregistered plates were recovered. Among the arrested was Ice Hand, Reaper, and even Vice, key figures in the Vulture leadership. But the real prize was Vico DeLuna himself, found trying to escape through a maintenance tunnel beneath the building. He was wearing civilian clothes, no weapons, and offered no resistance. It was as if he knew this moment would come eventually. Maya couldn't savor the victory for long. The burner phone Ghost had planted pinged hours later, and the coordinates led them straight to the farmhouse in Bakersfield. By the time agents arrived, the scene was grim. Blood stained the walls. 3 bodies were found, young Vulture recruits who had apparently been killed execution style. But Crackshot wasn't among them. What they did find, however, was a hidden laptop, a ledger of names and payments, and detailed plans for future Vulture expansions into Nevada, Arizona, and even parts of Mexico. Ghost's disappearance was now a haunting silence. No trace, no signal. Nothing. Maya suspected he had gone into hiding, understanding that his role as an informant would make him a marked man forever. She filed a protection request under a fake name and moved his sister into witness relocation, hoping he'd find his way back someday. In the days that followed, the media exploded with headlines. California's Iron Empire falls. $20 million in gang assets seized. Most feared Mafia leader captured. Vico DeLuna was booked under federal charges including racketeering, conspiracy to murder, arms trafficking, and money laundering. His court appearance was brief. No emotion, no statement, just a cold stare. Rumors swirled that he would plead a deal to avoid life imprisonment, but Maya knew better. Vico wouldn't speak. He'd rather behind bars than betray the empire he built. The Iron Vultures were shattered. Their leadership was either behind bars or dead. Dozens of fronts were shut down, money routes were exposed, and their reputation had taken a major blow. Yet, Maya knew this wasn't the end. Crackshot was still out there, likely planning a return, and the younger generation of the Vultures was not going to disappear quietly. For now, California had a moment of peace, but under the surface, embers still burned. The fall of Vico DeLuna was a landmark victory. But for Maya, it was just one piece of a longer war, one that would keep evolving as long as power, profit, and blood ruled the streets. The arrest of Vico DeLuna shook California's criminal underworld to its core. For over a decade, he had been the shadow ruler of vast illegal operations, his name spoken in whispers and his face seen only by a trusted few. With Vico behind bars and his top lieutenants either dead or in custody, many believed the Iron Vultures were finished. Law enforcement declared a major victory. News stations aired round the clock coverage of the takedown. Communities breathed easier. But deep within California's darkest corners, a different story was beginning to unfold, one that hinted at the return of something even more dangerous. The first signs were small and easy to miss. A few known Vulture associates in San Bernardino began showing up again after months of silence. In Oakland, 2 local gangs, rumored to have pledged loyalty to the Vultures, suddenly stopped fighting each other. Anonymous social media accounts began sharing cryptic images. Black vultures painted on walls, blood red feathers with the caption, "It never ends." To the public, it all looked like the leftover noise of a fallen gang. But to those watching closely, it was the beginning of a new chapter. The man behind the quiet reawakening was none other than Luis "Crackshot" Morales. His disappearance after the Bakersfield massacre had left everyone guessing. Was he dead, hiding, or laying low? In truth, Crackshot had gone underground with a clear plan. He had lost the internal power struggle with Vico, but now Vico was gone, and Crackshot, unlike his former leader, had no intention of ruling from the shadows. He wanted to rebuild the Iron Vultures not as a secretive syndicate, but as a feared and public force that controlled through shock, dominance, and ruthless expansion. Crackshot restructured the gang using younger, more reckless members, those who had grown up idolizing the Vultures' past and were hungry to reclaim that power. He eliminated the old-school rules of silence and discretion. This new generation posted their presence openly. They wore Vulture symbols proudly, carried weapons in the open, and broadcast messages that dared anyone to challenge them. Videos surfaced online of armed men wearing black bandanas storming rival safehouses, laughing as they lit stash spots on fire. Their faces were visible. Their message was unmistakable. The Vultures were back. Maya Kessler, now retired from the FBI, watched these developments from afar. Though no longer active, she remained in contact with a few trusted agents. When the footage began surfacing, she immediately recognized the patterns. The precision, the planning. It was Crackshot style, but with less restraint. The structure Vico once enforced had been replaced by chaos, and that chaos was spreading. Maya had once believed that taking down the head of the organization would be enough to dismantle it completely. Now she realized the Vultures were more than just a gang. They were an ideology, and Crackshot had become its prophet. In San Diego, a federal raid on what was believed to be a Vulture weapons stash uncovered a disturbing find. A wall covered in photographs of Maya, Ghost, and several task force agents. Rex had been marked across the faces of some, while others had question marks. It was a hit list. Whoever was running the operation hadn't forgotten. The message was personal. Maya was advised to move again, increase security, and remain out of the public eye, but she knew she had to do more. The war wasn't over. It had simply evolved. By early the following year, the Vultures had retaken parts of Oakland, Fresno, and even reached into Las Vegas. Their control wasn't as centralized or organized as under Vico, but it was no less terrifying. They had become a fragmented but lethal network of cells, each one loyal to Crackshot's vision of violent dominance. Communities once freed from their grip now lived under a new kind of fear. It wasn't about drugs or guns anymore. It was about survival. The media stopped calling it a comeback and began calling it a resurgence. Analysts on crime shows debated whether Vico's capture had truly made a difference. Some claimed that the gang's decentralized rise was even harder to fight. Others believed a larger, more coordinated force would eventually dismantle it for good. But those living in the neighborhoods controlled by the Vultures knew better. They knew the truth. The Iron Vultures never really died. They simply changed feathers. In the end, the story of California's most feared street mafia wasn't just about power, territory, or money. It was about legacy, the kind written not in headlines, but in blood. And as long as that legacy lived on in the hearts of those who saw the streets as a battlefield, the war would never truly end.